Real estate investment practice problem using Excel. Points break-even point part 1. Get ready because we're raising the stakes with real estate. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet, would like to follow along, note that we have 3 tabs on down below: example, practice, and blank. Let's take a look at them now, starting off with the example tab. We're focusing in on the points again. In prior presentations, we looked at points in terms of what they are and what the tools we can use in order to analyze them will be. Now we're going to be looking at the decision to take on the points or not, as well as the break-even point, the point at which taking on the loan or not could have the same cost. That's going to be our objective. Now, I know you're probably thinking at this point, holy golf course, Batman, this is a lot of information on points. I thought we were in for a 9-hole. This is like an 18er here. And it is true, we're focusing in on points. We're in a bit of a sand trap with regards to the points. But it is one of those kind of things that can be quite complex when you're looking at the differences in loans. And if you're working in the area of loans, it could be the point of contention between different loans. And if you can analyze it and describe it in a little bit more in-depth than possibly competition can be if you're in the industry, then I think it could be a really good advantage for us. So it's a good idea to have a good grasp of the points. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our information on the left. We're going to calculate it with no points. We're going to copy and paste our amortization table and data to the right, and then add the points and think about what would happen with regards to our rates and whatnot, the cost of the points that we have done in prior presentations. Then we'll calculate the break-even point in kind of like a simplified type of way. This is the quick calculation that most people will be able to do, and then we'll kind of think about that in a little bit more in-depth way with our IRR calculations to see what it actually means and possibly get a little bit more exact in terms of our comparisons. And this is the point in which you can possibly get a little bit of an edge on the competition, being able to describe this in a little bit more depth and understanding than the competition can, and it could lead to better decision makings possibly as well. So if we go to the practice tab, then this is going to have the same information but have some blank cells so that you can not have to go through the formatting so much and work through the practice problem with less formatting. The blank tab is where we're just going to start it from scratch. We're going to start with one little scratch and we're going to make everything from that. So we're going to make it from one scratch. So here we go. We got our information up top. We got the home. We're going to have it at $200,000. We're not going to put anything down at this point because I just want to keep the loan amount at the $200,000 to keep it simple. We got the years are going to be the 30. Months are going to be 360, 30 times 12. The rate, we're going to have the 5%. That's before the points are impacted. Now then, we're going to add the points information into our worksheet. Now I'm going to do this quickly because we've seen this in a prior presentation. So if you want to see it a little bit more slowly, look at a prior presentation on it. But I'm going to say the points, which I'm going to assume can be 1 through 3 points. So let's say 1 point here to start off with. The rate decrease per point, meaning how much am I going to decrease the rate by paying down the rate per point. We're going to say it's going to be 0.0025, making that a percent by going to the number group, percentifying it, adding some decimals, so 0.25%. So 5% minus 1 point would give us minus 0.25% for 4.75. That gives us, and then we want the point fee. Now the point fee, a point means 1% of the loan amount. So we want to be able to calculate the point, what it's going to cost us up front to pay down the rate to buy the points, which we're going to have to pay up front, 200,000 times the 1, but I need to multiply that times 0.01 because I want this to come out to be 2,000. So we're going to say 2,000. If I then make that 0.2, we should have 4,000. 3 points should get us to the 6,000. Then we want the rate after points. So what's going to be my rate if I had 3 points? It would be 0.25 times 3, and then 5% minus that, which would be 5% minus 0.75 or 4.25%. Let's do that with a formula. 5% minus, and then we're going to say 3 times that 0.25, and that'll give us, if we add some decimals, number group, percentify, decimals, 4.25 looks correct. If I made this a 2, we get to the 4.5, a 1, 4.75. Let's bring it back to 3. Then we want the effective rate. Now, the effective rate is not going to be used to calculate the amortization table, but that's where our comparison comes in. Because if I was to compare this loan and say, well, what if I paid the $6,000 to get the points down to 4.25, and I compared that to some other loan that has some different combination between points and fees and whatnot and the rate, then I can't really compare them because I've got this breakout of what I'm paying in these two components that aren't very comparable. So I want to roll them into one percentage rate, like a ratio, remembering that when I do comparisons, ratios are usually what we need. That's how we, when we measure two baseball players or two sports athletes, we can only use their ratios in order to compare, because they have different at-bats and all that kind of stuff. So we got the same thing here. You got these two things, can't compare those two. Let's try to roll them into a ratio or 1%. For that, we're going to call it the effective rate. Effective rate is going to be calculated with the trusty rate formula, the rate formula. The number of periods is going to be 360, comma. The payment is going to be this payment down here, calculated at the 983.88. And then we're going to say, and that needs to be negative, by the way, negative 983.88. And then comma, and the present value is going to be the loan amount minus the 6,000. Remember, the loan is kind of what we got. We got it, and then we paid the seller for it. We got a loan, we got the 200,000, but then we paid the seller for the home. And then minus the outflow, we had to pay the 6,000 to the finance company up front. So we really got in period 0, 200,000 money that we paid off, and then minus the 6,000 that we had to pay for the upfront payment of the points, the prepayment of the interest, the pay down of the rate, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to then take that, and that will give us the monthly amount, I believe. If we go to the number group, make it a percent, adding decibels. Let's now make it a yearly amount by taking that rate, putting our cursor at the end of it, and multiplying times 12 to get the 4.508 about. Okay, that's our starting point. Now I'd like to compare points and non-points. I could do that by changing the points from 0 to 1, 2, and 3, but I'd like to see a side-by-side comparison. So what I want to do is kind of copy this over so I don't have to keep jumping back and forth. Or you can use pivot tables to do this, which we'll do in a future presentation. Also, when you change these items around, you got to double check that your payment is picking up the correct interest rate here instead of the old rate, which was up top. Double check your amortization tables picking up the correct rate as well. Double check that the bottom line of your amortization table comes out to be 0, which should give you a check that it's doing that correctly. So now I'm just going to copy this whole thing, and I'm going to put it over here in column K so I can have a side-by-side, one with points, one without. So I've got no points now, and then I'm going to copy this by putting my cursor on A to I, columns A to I, right-click on A to I, and copy it. We're going to put that in column K, right-click and paste it, or I'll just Control-V because my right-click's sticky. It's sticky right now, it won't work. So then over here, we're going to add the points. So now let's put the points so we can do our side-by-side comparison, 3 points. Now remember, you got to make sure that anything that has an absolute reference, you want to make sure that it's pulling over properly. Your data set should be okay, but your amortization table has some absolute reference in it, so it's going to cause us a problem. Where are they at? This payment amount is coming from column B, which is way over here. It should be coming from this one now. So to fix that, no problem, easy. We're just going to say this is going to be that number now. Needs to be F4 on the keyboard, $ before the L and 14. Put our cursor back on it, double click, fill handle, pulling it all the way down. On the interest, this also has that absolute reference, referencing something in column B. So we're going to say, I got to fix that. We're going to say that needs to be referencing this 4.25 now, making that absolute F4 in the keyboard, $ before the L and 12. Put our cursor back on that, double click, copies all the way down, double check bottom line of our table that should be down to 0 after 360 payments. It is. That gives us some assurance at least that we have done things properly, so we will move forward from there. So now you can, of course, do your comparison side by side. You can say, well, if I pay the 6,000, then I paid down my points, and I calculated my effective rate, which should be a good comparison, meaning the rate that I can compare between the two is 4.05 if I pay the points, and it's 5% if I do not pay the points. So that would mean that paying down the points would be better generally. Now that's the case if you basically use the points for the entire, meaning if you have the loan out for the entire 30 years, that will generally be the case. But you'll recall when we calculated this 4.508, it's done by basically taking in the present value in essence of the entire loan. So if you were to sell the home earlier, then you could have an issue, because what you're doing here is you're paying the $6,000 up front, which is basically going to pay for itself over the life of the loan. So that means as time passes, you're going to be more likely to be paying this thing down. Whereas over here, you didn't put the $6,000 up front, but you're paying the higher payments on it. So at the front end of this loan, you'll be better off not paying the points. So if you were to have sold the home after 5 years, then you may be better, or let's say like 2 years, you might be better over here not paying the points. Whereas on the other hand, if you're holding this home, if you plan on being there and living in it, most likely, this would be people that are purchasing the home to live in, they're gonna be there possibly the whole life or 30 years, then you're gonna say, well, this one would most likely be better. So now the question is, well, where's that break-even point, right? So you might say, and there's two kind of ways you can think about this. You could say, well, if I'm planning on selling it after 5 years, then I can then calculate what the effective rate would be after 5 years. This is where it gets a little bit more complex, because you're still taking out a 30-year loan, but you would like to know what the effective rate would be at 5 years so you can do your comparisons, right? That's going to be a little bit more tricky. Or you can try to look for the point at which the two loans would basically result in the same point, and find the break-even point, and then make your decision from there. So let's do that. The classical break-even point calculation, which isn't perfect, but this is what you will most likely see most of the time, is going to be called the points. Let's just call it points break-even point. The point break-even point. What's the point of the point break-even point? The point is that if you take the points, there'll be a point at which the points break even. So we're going to say the cost of points. Let's do our good old black and white on the header here. Let's make this a black and white thing. I'm going to go home tab and then make this black and white like so it stands out for us. The cost of the points are going to be equal to, notice because I have these two scenarios, I can pull this with cell references and just pick up the cost of the points. That's how much we're putting down up front, the $6,000, in order to pay down the rate, as they say. So the difference in payments then, so now we're going to look at the difference in payments with points and without points. This is the major advantage of points, because by paying that $6,000 to pay down the rate, as they call it, instead of paying down the loan amount, putting more money down up front, then it usually results in a higher payment amount. A bigger decrease in the payment amount, which is good if you're trying to budget your payment amount based on your income. So we're going to have the difference in the payments. So let's say the payments without points, which of course will be higher than the payments with points. So I'm going to put my cursor here. I'm going to say equals. I'm going to scroll all the way to the left to our scenario without points, pick up the payments of the 1,07364. I won't put the pennies on this time, so it's rounded. And then the payments with points is going to be equal to that 983, 984 about. So that's the difference in our payments that we would be making each payment if we were to pay for the points or not pay for the points. The difference in payments then being the subtraction problem. This equals the 1074 about minus the 984 about. We got about 90 as the difference. There's rounding involved here. So that's going to give us our points break even in months. So this is our points break even point in months. Let's underline that. This is going to be equal to the 6,000 divided by the 90 about, and that's going to be about 67 months. Now we might want to know what it is in years. So points break even point in years. Points break even point, let's say point in years, which will just take that 67 divided by 12 to get 6 years, about adding a couple decimals, number group, couple decimals, 5.57 years. Okay, let's go ahead and bluify this. We'll make that blue by going to our drop down, blue and border blue, border blue. Okay, so that means that if we go to our table over here, we got 67 at our time frame. I can go on down to 67, which is right there, 6 year, in the 6 year area. So this is what they're saying the break even point is. Now that calculation is nice and easy, and I'll use my little colors here to make it like that. But it's also not exactly, it doesn't takes into consideration basically the cash flow of the points up top and the difference in the cash flow. But we also have these differences in terms of the loan balance at the end. So if you actually sold the property after that point in time, then you'd have to pay off the loan at that point in time. So it's a little bit more complex than just that. But the general idea would be that, well, that means that if you had if you were planning on selling it before 5 years, then you may not want to buy the points. And if you were going to have it for longer than the 5 years or 6 years or so, then it might be worthwhile to have the points. That would be the general idea. So let's kind of think it out with our IRR calculation here to get a little bit more in depth on what this might be. So we'll use our IRR tools. And this could be useful, especially if you're talking to someone that says, hey, look, I expect to be having my loan only for 5 years. And then you can go and actually kind of calculate what the IRR rate would be after 5 years and whatnot. So let's think about this, the IRR being that kind of like the effective rate that we could use for a comparison, internal rate of return. So let's say we have the points here, and we're going to calculate this with points, and we're going to say 0.01, and we're going to bring this on down to 67 time frames. 67, which is going to be right there where the green line is. And let's center that. And let's make this black and white. Do our font group. Let's do our black and white thing and center it. And then, so the points, we're going to say up front, the cash flow that happened is going to be equal to the $200,000 loan amount that we received to buy the home. Then we use it to buy the home, minus the $6,000 that we have to give to the loan company to give the prepayment of the points that we paid up front. Means that we have a cash flow at time period 0 of the $194,000. And then we made these payments, which I'm going to put as a negative, outflows of that 984 about. I'll just copy that all the way down, double clicking, copying it all the way down. This is basically the cash flow. Cash flow. Let's center that and wrap the text. Scroll it on down. See, the tricky thing is here at this last point, if we sold the property at that point in time, we'd still have this loan balance that we would have to pay off. We'd have to basically sell the home, pay off the loan balance. The loan balance will be different between the two scenarios because of the different rate and so on and so forth. So we'll actually have an outflow here with regards to the loan amount of negative the amount of the balance in this last period, and including also that 984. So we're going to pay the normal 984, and then we'd have the loan balance that we'd have to pay off. So there would be the cash flow at the end. So that's kind of the twist, the tricky component that you got to think about if you're really going to, compare these. Let's take the total. That would mean the total outflow in terms of cash flow, if we were not taking in time value of money, just looking at basically the cash flow. We're looking at the 51,125. Let's take a look at the IRR now. The IRR, don't include the total, equals IRR. This is the internal rate of return, or basically the effective rate given this set of periods. And then we'll take this data up top, the IRR. I'm going to close up the brackets, and then I'm going to multiply it times 12. Close up the brackets, multiply it times 12 in the IRR, which I can't see the formula right now because it's not on the screen. So there it is. So we'll take that whole thing, and then I'm going to take that and multiply it times 12 to get the yearly rate. Percentify that number group, percentify, add a couple decimals. So we're at the 4.9. So now we're at the 4.9, which of course is different than the effective rate that we calculated over the life of this thing, which was 4.5, right? So you're going to get a different rate at that point in time. Also, if you were calculating the exact break-even point, you would think you would want this rate to be 5%. So it's not exactly 5% at that point in time, the time period which we calculated the break-even point with our little formula up top. So let's try to find the point where the IRR would equal 5%, which you would think would be basically the even amount between the two loans, in more specifically. So let's try to do that. That's a little bit tedious to do. You got to kind of trial and error in terms of the IRR, but you can approximate it here. So let's copy these two up top. I'm going to Control C, copy them, and then I'm going to take the number of periods. It's going to be down to 56. It's going to be 0, 1, and then I'm going to copy this down to 56 payments. 56 is right there. And then center that, alignment and center. And then we'll do the same thing. I'm just going to say equals the same cash flow. So I'm just going to equal the one to the left, but just go down to 56. And then we'll say, okay, this last one, let's take the loan balance. Actually, that's too far. Wanted to go down to 56. We're going to do the same thing and pick up the loan balance at that point in time, which is negative of this number minus the payment. That's just the outflow that we would have to pay if we were to sell at that point in time, the payment plus the balance that would go out. So there we have that. If we total this up, total, and sum this up equals the sum, we then are going to get the total cash flow of that. If we take the IRR equals the IRR of the cash flow column, that would give us, if we did this, a monthly amount. We're going to take that and multiply it times 12 to get the yearly amount, add percent, number group percent, couple decimals. So that's closer to 5%, which you would, so that seems from a cash flow time value of money standpoint to be possibly a little bit more accurate than the 67. Of course, to get there, you got to do some trial and error to kind of figure out this IRR. So it would be around this point. And then you kind of look up here. Now, you can also do that a little bit easier, maybe if you want to get more exact, by using your pivot tables and looking at it on a yearly basis. So, for example, let's just try to do this with the normal loan that without points. Let's do the same header and say no points, and do the same thing from 0, 1, 2. Copy that down and pick up the IRR this way. Copying this down to 56, center that, alignment and center. We're going to now pick up the cash flow from without point part, way over here. That's going to start at the 200,000 instead of, because we have no points here. And then we're going to take the cash flow negative of the payments that we're making if we had no points, which are 1,074. Copy that down. I'm just going to double click to copy that down. And then if we summed it up after 56, assuming we sell it at this point, we have to do this last part again. After 56 would give us a total. We'd have to pay off the loan, which here would be 184,878 minus that last payment of 1,074. That would be the outflow at that point. Summing that up, total equals SUM. Summing it up, we then get the 45. Notice these two are pretty close right there, right, in terms of cash flow. And then the IRR equals the IRR of the cash flows. Closing that up times 12. So here's the formula so you can see it. IRR times 12. And then percentifying it, adding some decimals, see we're closer to the 5%, a little bit more exact in terms of the comparable rates at this point 56 than the 4.9. So and just to look at it one more way to try to drive this home, let's try to think about, well, what if we sold the property after the point of 67, and then what if we sold it at point 56 and just compare the two at where we would stand? Because that's basically what the outcome would be, what people are thinking of, right? I'm going to sell it after this time period. So let's say we sold it, sale at 67. We're going to have no points versus points, and then the difference. Let's do our headings here. Let's do some black and white. Let's do some centering. Let's do a wrap. Black and white. This one, I'm not going to center it. And there we go. And we can make this a little bit larger so we can have the difference there. Okay. So let's say we sold it sales price. And let's just say the sales price happens to be the amount we purchased it for, which is just going to be the $200,000. So we'll say we sold it for $200,000. No difference there between the two. The loan balance between the two, if there's no points, the loan balance after 67 periods that we would have to pay off then was here, 181,471. That's how much we would have to pay off. And if we had the points, the loan balance would be here. This is where the confusing factor is. These loan balances, of course, will be different, that we'd have to pay off at the point of sale. And so we have that differences in the loan balance. Subtracting that out, that will be our proceeds after paying off the loan, equal to the $200,000 minus the loan balances. So there we have those differences. And then we could say, okay, we also had the points paid up front. 0 for no points. For the points, we paid points up front of 6,000. Difference, this minus this. Underlining this. Let's underline this. That means that we paid 6,000, so that we got the net after points is going to be equal to this minus the points we paid. So we've got the difference. Whoop. Okay, paso. We're going to copy that across. So there we have the difference. And then we can see that we had cash flow. We can compare that to the cash flow we had up until this point. Cash flow to this point. Let's say for no points, we had equals the sum of the payments that we made up until that point, which were these payments on down to here. And then we included that last one we paid off as well. And then over here, we have equals the sum of the payments for points, the one with points, which is going to be these payments, on down to here. Enter. Subtracting that out, this equals this minus this. And we've got the 6,000 there. So the totals, if we sum this up, the total cash flow is this minus this. Copying that across, and we get, that difference of 2,280 still. Let's just recap that. So we have the sales price. That's the same between the two. The loan balances are different, and that's going to give us our proceeds that basically would be different after the sales amount. We had to pay the $6,000 up front on the points side of things. So if I take that out, this would be basically the net after the points that we would be talking about. Then we had the cash flow that we paid up until this point in time in terms of just payments that we're making. And that would be these two items. So then if you compare the two, you still have this difference of 2,280 between the two. Let's see if we can copy that down and say, well, what about if we do the same thing and paste it here. But now I'm going to change this to 56 payment point. We got the same 200,000. So the 200,000, I'm just going to try to repopulate that, will be the same. Difference there. The loan balance now will be different because now we got a different point in time that we sold this at. So we sold it this time right there. So that's going to be the loan balance at that point. And then we've got the loan balance here for with the points, which is going to be now here. So there's the difference in the loan balances, the amounts that we paid for points. We paid the same 6,000 that we paid on the points here, subtracting that out, and we didn't pay anything on the no points one. And then we can take a look at the sum of the payments that we made, which is going to be equals the sum of the payments for the items where we did not have any points, which would be this one on down to this item here for the 56th payment. And this one would be the sum with points. So the sum of the one with points would be equal to, scrolling over these items down to that 984 and enter. So we've got that. And so then you've got your difference here. It's a little bit closer here than on that 56 one. And that's kind of the idea we're trying to get. We basically just recalculated the cash flow, but try to do it in a sales standpoint, which is probably how most people would be thinking about it. You'd have the same difference down here in the cash flows that we looked at down here. So, you know, just trying to get a couple different looks at that. So that means that this first break-even calculation's pretty good, but it's probably not totally exact if you're thinking about the sale at that point in time. You can use the IRR calculations to try to compare things a little bit more exact and use just simply your cash flow calculations, but you got to take into consideration that ending point. And sometimes it might be easier to present either to yourself or to others with the calculation here that would be using that would be adding like a sales price just to get the idea of what's going to happen after that point in time. If there was a sale to take place, you're still really just looking at the cash flow, but then you're adding like a sales component to it to look at the proceeds. So let's go ahead and just color this. We're going to make this look nicer, make it the blue and bold thing. I'm going a little fast here because this is going a little long. So we're going to make it blue and bold. Just do some formatting from the scratch. Start with one scratch and then format it up until this worksheet. If you got a scratch, you can make a worksheet. So then we'll do some blue and bold here, blue and bold, blue and bold, blue and bold. And then we're going to say underlines here, underlines there. We might want to just try to equate these columns possibly. Make the columns all the same. Maybe. Because that would make it look nicer. There we go. So there we go. We're going to call that good.